So this has the relationship between Iran and Russia has changed dramatically, and it's not going to be reversed. And another problem with this uh, madman behavior is that even if Trump wants to have a better relationship with Iran and Russia, this behavior not only makes it almost impossible to negotiate and to trust any negotiation, but also it enhances the position or belief that you can't put any eggs in the American basket. So let's say Russia does do a deal with the United States over Ukraine in the future, or Iran does some sort of deal in the future, or does negotiate with the United States in the future. I don't think that the Iranians will contemplate for a moment taking a couple of eggs out of the Chinese basket or the Indian basket or the Russian basket and putting them in the American basket, because there's no trust. It will take decades for people to rethink that. And I think the same is true with Russia. I think the Russians are not going to say, okay, we'll relinquish this part of our relationship with Iran or with China and then put our bags or our eggs in the American basket. And this, of course, is something that people in MAGA, some of them their objective all along in 2016 was to bring the Russians into the American camp and to have this big coalition and directed against others. But events over the past 8 years, I think, have destroyed that and have made everyone much more cautious. The Iran and Russia, as you rightly point out, have a history which is not positive, has not been positive. The wars in the past, also the Soviet Union, but ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Iranian-Russian relations have evolved, and especially during the last 3 years, they've evolved very rapidly. And ironically, it's been the United States and the Europeans that have acted as the catalyst. Otherwise, the North-South corridor is something that should have been developed decades ago. But as you rightly pointed out, because of that mistrust, and also because we have always been Eurocentric too, and both us and the Russians, we've always been, even though we've been saying that the world is changing and Asia is rising, but we still have that old tendency to stick to the past, to cling to something that is literally melting before us, like ice under the sun. Well, so we weren't really thinking about Russia. We thought Russia, perhaps we did think that Russia was just a gas station, and that it had been. Probably they were thinking the same about Iran in many respects. But the United States has forced the two countries to rethink things, and now the two countries see that the potential is huge, and that they've made such a huge mistake by not rethinking their policies or building this relationship decades ago. The top two countries in natural gas reserves, two countries with huge mineral reserves and oil, and of course the North-South corridor is itself has huge potential for Russia, its trade across East Asia, Southern Asia, and the Persian Gulf region in Africa, but also for Iran across Russia with all its potential and beyond, because wars won't be forever. Iran's trade with Europe and the trade of much of the Asia could go right through this corridor towards Europe when ultimately the war comes to an end and things change, whether it's 1 year from now or 10 years from now. Actually, I think that this is another element that the United States or Trump doesn't take into consideration. First of all, with regards to Saudi Arabia and these countries, and here I think that this is a part of it. What the Israelis did during this almost 16 months of genocide was that they have weakened all of these Arab countries and even Erdogan by showing their hypocrisy, by the sheer fact that they were silent or they never did anything to support the Palestinians. They were all weakened, some more, some less. Erdogan, of course, through his speeches and bluster, his base. He's sort of like Trump. He has a base that will stick with him no matter what happened. But many do have turned against it. And in the region, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere, people have been very angry because of the silence of their government. So Netanyahu has weakened these countries that are in the American camp. But what Trump did, I think, further weakens them, because it doesn't matter if Saudi Arabia has given the green light to expel all these Palestinians, or if Egypt has given the green light, or Jordan has given the green light. I doubt they did have, but it will raise questions among ordinary people in these countries. Are they doing a secret deal behind our backs? Are our governments betraying the Palestinian people again? And this only uh, further undermines these regimes. And in addition to that, you see the destruction of Syria, which, as I said earlier, is a threat to Saudi Arabia. These Wahhabi groups, these Salafist groups, Al Qaeda, ISIS, countries that they threaten first and foremost are countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, potentially. And it also, by the way, this policy is going to further the divide between the Saudis and the Turks, and the Saudis and the Emiratis on the one hand, and Qatar on the other. So they're only making it. What Trump has done is that he's made it more complicated for the U.S. camp, and it's going to make these countries more in a more difficult situation, potentially more closer to some form of instability. So the last 16, 17 months have been disastrous for all of them because of their indifference, their silence, or their collaboration, exporting oil or transporting goods, or doing trade, or preserving political ties. It's damaged them, but this has just taken it a step further. So what we're seeing today is, it seems everything is quiet, but I think underneath a lot of things are happening. So Syria, Trump's behavior, all of that is potentially very dangerous for the U.S. position in West Asia, North Africa, and beyond, because the world is watching, and it doesn't look good for the United States. Right now, Mr. Erdogan and Qatar, they are dealing with a massive catastrophe. The Syrian economy has been destroyed. Things are much worse now than they were under President Assad. These groups are not united; they're deeply divided. The economy, the bureaucracy has fallen apart, and the Israelis have destroyed the country's much of the country's infrastructure, what was left of it, and they've occupied new territories. And these extremist groups are killing minorities and Sunni Sufis, and of course, we all see how bad things are. So, and this is like a black hole for Turkey, because they're the ones. It's theirs now. They own it, and I think that Turkey is recognizing, despite the initial euphoria, that this is not going to end well. But I think Mr. Erdogan, from what I understand from my friends in the party, and also people from outside the party, I have friends among them too. Apparently, there is buyer's remorse. In Syria, they never expected to take the country. They never expected to even take Aleppo. The objective, apparently, was to reach the outskirts of Aleppo so that he could have a stronger hand at the negotiating table. Syria collapsed. So Turkey has tilted towards Iran. After a couple of weeks of euphoria, they are now trying to find some sort of solutions through negotiating with Iran. Iran wants Turkey in our camp. Iran wants Turkey to be with Russia, Iran, with BRICS, with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But I think Mr. Erdogan, he is sort of like Trump. He's, people would always say Erdogan's very smart. He knows how to play both sides. But again, when you're always playing both sides, at the end of the day, no one trusts you. And if you don't have anyone's trust, I think in the long run, the damage that is caused is much greater than the benefits that are gained. Today, Iran is much stronger than it was back then. both inside the country militarily, but also across the region. And as you pointed out, Iran is now a member of BRICS. It's a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Its relationship with countries across Asia have evolved. Russia, a very important agreement was signed. The relationship is growing rapidly. The relationship with China is growing rapidly. The relationship with India is improving. And as you pointed out, in the region, especially with Saudi Arabia, relations have improved. No thanks to the United States or the West, but partially because of the good offices of the Chinese government that helped the two sign an agreement. One of the things that they were trying to impose on Trump was an attack on Iran, and I'm sure he didn't want that. We have to always keep in mind that the United States, at its height, at the height of its power in 2003, when it had taken Afghanistan and it took Iraq and basically surrounded Iran. And someone once said at that time that real men go to Tehran. Ultimately, the real men, or the supposed men, didn't go to Tehran because they knew that it was not a war they could win. They could devastate Iran, but they would also devastate themselves. I think there's no doubt that ordinary Iranians will see this as a challenge, and that the economic situation, which is not easy for most Iranians, is something that people are always concerned about. The wealthy, the very wealthy in Iran, obviously, they have their own interests, and I'm sure they're doing well under all circumstances. But the majority of Iranians do face the difficulties that exist, and part of those difficulties are because of the sanctions. And then when you look at Gaza now, when Trump says, well, the third stage of the deal is meaningless, it's irrelevant, when it can't be carried out, whereas this agreement was signed or agreed upon, this plan was agreed upon with the support of Trump. So I think that while Iran would like to have a reasonable relationship with the United States, I don't think that anyone here who is serious believes that to be possible at the moment. Iran-Turkish relations are a bit different. It's more complicated. Of course, Azeri and Turkish are not the same. They have similarities, but the leader is Azeri. Ayatollah Khamenei. Is an Azeri city in Iran. Marandi, my name means from Marand, which is another Azeri city very close to Tabriz. And of course, the president is from Tabriz. But I think actually Iranian Azeris, their view is that the Republic of Azerbaijan belongs to Iran. And so they are very nationalistic, and their religious identity in general is probably a bit above average than the ordinary Iranian. I think that Turkey is, from what I'm hearing from inside Turkey, from my friends in the Akaf, because Iran has a very long relationship with the party. Iran helped them come to power. The rise of the party under different names. It was, the movement was created by Najmuddin Erbakan, who was if he was alive today, he would be very different from Mr. Erdogan. He was a very sincere and courageous person who created this movement in the country. And I think the relationship, I think he would have been a part of, Turkey would have been in BRICS by now. His relationship with Iran and Russia would have been completely different, and we would have had a very different West Asia. Now, as the United States has been declining, they've been telling us that, well, we have AI, and that's what's going to keep us ahead of the game. But just in recent weeks, we saw how that has played out, and how the Chinese have shown that, no, actually, the United States doesn't even have AI anymore. So Americans and Europeans should think about, they don't have any. They push the Russians away because of their foolish expansionism, in Eastern Europe. They're pushing the Iranians away. They're pushing everyone towards each other, and that's actually the direction that the world was moving anyway. They've only, acted as a catalyst to push this forward more swiftly. And Iran, as you rightly point out, it's a very old civilization. So, and this is something that the Americans don't appreciate because of things like USAID, as an example. The Americans, and this is true about Russia as well, the Americans, they fund these people and organizations that say what they want to hear. These so-called Iranians, these Russians who are always saying that Russia's lost the war. Russia's being for 3 years we've been hearing Russia's defeated, and then what's the reality though? It's something very different. Or Iran is always being defeated after the ceasefire or before the ceasefire. They were saying that Iran is weakened in the region. They've been saying that for decades, but it never weakens. It never falls apart. Why? Because the Americans spend money on people to say what they want to hear. Those people use that part of that money to pay off people inside that. It's a circle. Russia is always losing. Iran is always losing. The Chinese cannot innovate. Yes, they can make goods. They can steal our ideas, but they're what DeepSeek. What's that? they just can't seem to understand that they are living in a bubble, and that bubble is about to burst. So they fund people to say what needs to be said, and the people in government, in the deep state, in the Senate and the House, and in all of them listen to these people. They believe their analysis. So everyone believes everyone else. Billions of dollars are wasted, and the United States always gets it wrong. So, although I don't have any sympathy for Trump, I don't like him. But the fact is that the United States, the deindustrialization of the country, was brought about by the state. Now, Trump wants to reverse it. I think it's way too late. I don't think you can just bring about, by tariffs to create an incentive for the industrialization of the country. I think that this will take decades, and the disruption will probably be worse than any benefits that come from it. But I do think that a lot of what Trump is doing is a response to the reality of the past few decades, where the United States got everything wrong. In the 1990s, they were at the height of their power, seemingly, because the Soviet Union had collapsed. They won the war in Kuwait, and the ghost of Vietnam was gone, and they squandered all that. Why? Because they believed their own nonsense. Iran is going to fall. Russia is collapsing. And now the United States is beginning, or at least some people in the United States are beginning to understand that something is deeply wrong, but they don't understand that the solution is something very different. The solution is to rethink relations with Iran. The solution is to rethink relations with Russia, to rethink the situation in Palestine, to rethink the relationship with China. And until the United States moves in that direction, I don't think things are going to get any better. I think actually things are going to get more difficult for the Americans. And of course, that's also dangerous for the rest of the world, because the decline of the United States is a good thing on the one hand, but it also makes the United States more dangerous. And that itself is a further incentive for strengthening bonds between Iran and Russia. And I think Iran and Russia and other countries in BRICS and across the world are taking this into account. Well, actually, if I was the Iranian foreign ministry and I had some role in using that position to troll the Americans and the Europeans, I would offer to send troops to Greenland to protect it from any American aggression. But that is exactly as you put it. It's the shepherd now is busy eating the sheep, and I think that Europeans or I'm sure at least a portion of the elites in Europe are thinking that about that very quietly, not out loud, but quietly they're thinking, we've been always saying how Moscow and Russia, they're a threat to us, but ultimately we see that the threat comes from the United States. And so basically what Trump is doing is he's saying that you cannot trust me. You cannot trust an agreement that is signed by me. You cannot trust an agreement that I help facilitate to bring into existence. So in future, if Russia wants to negotiate with the United States over Ukraine to end the conflict, because ultimately this is about the United States and Russia, Zelensky is a nobody. He's up. He's finished. Ultimately, if Iran and the United States want to have negotiations over another deal, how can Iran or Russia trust Trump? It makes a deal virtually impossible. It makes it almost inevitable that whatever Russia signs, whatever Iran signs, uh, later on Trump will say, "Well, I don't agree with that anymore. So from tomorrow, we're doing it a different way." It to me, it sounds almost inevitable with the personality that he has. So I think he's damaging the United States, and those who are skeptical of negotiations with the United States will point to this and say, "Look, these are people who we can't deal with. We can't take them seriously." So this madman theory, I think, doesn't work. I personally believe that this Greenland and Canada and Panama and Mexico and all this is an attempt to justify retreat by the United States, because in my opinion, retreat is inevitable. So I think that by making these proclamations and by putting out these statements and saying some of these somewhat outrageous things, it's sort of like telling people, look over there, look at that shiny object, all is good, and this retreat really isn't all that important. Of course, I'm exaggerating a bit, but I think that's to a degree how it is. It is a consolidation because the Americas is if the United States retreats, they want the Americas. That's their strongest. That's where they are the strongest, and that's why I don't think things will bode well for countries like Brazil. And I think Brazil, contrary to what was believed before, that India was the weakest link in BRICS, I think actually it's probably Brazil that's the weakest link because Brazil will be under a lot of pressure, and probably if hopefully the North-South corridor is completed, India will actually have a greater interest with BRICS, within BRICS. And one good piece of news that I heard in Moscow was the ambassador saying that the project is now going to move forward much more swiftly because a lot of the difficulties have been resolved. So I think that this is a consolidation. This is both a consolidation, it is a retreat, but it's also a distraction in the broader sense. But I think that it also the mechanism here is to strengthen a weak Netanyahu and I think that right now at least Trump is in the driver's seat and not Netanyahu, and that's why he can do this.